Okay, students, welcome to Chapter 14. Last week we talked about resumes and cover letters, but those are just the preliminary steps to get to the big show, which is the interview. So congratulations. Let's assume that you've now landed the interview. Be careful what you wish for, right? And now you're actually going to get a chance to interview for the company and possibly be offered a job. So if they've brought you in for the interview, we want to keep in mind that on paper, you have the skills and experience that they're looking for. So that piece is going to be further addressed with more questions during the interview, but really when they bring you in for the interview, they're looking for some other things. They want to know, what's your personality and temperament like? Are you going to be a fit for our department and the company as a whole? So in order for you to put the best possible light of them to be able to kind of find out who you are, is you have to be able to relax a bit into the interview and let your personality come out. So when we're interviewing, we oftentimes get nervous, right? Why? Because we feel like the stakes are high. This is a job I really want, and if I blow it, then I'm going to miss this great opportunity. But I'm going to encourage you to think about it a different way. So they're going to hire someone. Why not you? Start there with believing that you're qualified. They brought you in for an interview, so dispel any self-doubt about being qualified for the job and being nervous about your qualifications. Am I good enough? Get rid of all that story. Assume that you're good enough, and once you have cleared that mental obstacle, then you can just go into the interview and have some fun and let your personality shine through. So a little bit of nerves in an interview is okay at the beginning when you're kind of settling in. You can say, even I haven't interviewed much lately, I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm excited. But if you remain nervous throughout the entire interview, that's probably not good for you, and probably you're not going to get an offer because they didn't really get a chance to see who you are and who your personality is. They couldn't get past the fact that you were a very nervous applicant. So that might make you think, oh, now I'm even more nervous because I'm going to be nervous about getting nervous. So just remember this, the stakes really aren't that high. You might think this is your dream job and the company that you really want to work for, but there's thousands of jobs out there, and it's a two-way street with each interview. So Mark Twain had the classic statement of, an interview is really a conversation between two liars. You as the applicant are trying to put yourself in the best possible light, and the company, as the employer, is trying to put themselves in the best possible light. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So don't fret if you don't get the offer. Don't fret about wallowing in defeat. So if you don't get the job offer, it means that the company felt that you weren't the best fit. So you have to make peace with that, because if they were to hire you and you weren't the best fit, you're going to be miserable. You're not going to like the job. You don't have the right temperament for the company or the position. So if you don't get the job, accept it and just move on. Brush yourself off and go ahead and take another stab at the next one. There's always another job that comes along. So not getting the job is sometimes a blessing, because if we trust the company's decision, then we must accept the fact that maybe I wasn't the best fit and I would have possibly been miserable anyways. You're going to be giving a lot of yourself to the company, 50 plus hours a week. So don't think that the company is holding all the cards. They have what I want. They have that dream job that I want. Well, you don't know until you actually work there, right? You might find out that they're going to work you to death and it's more stressful and not nearly as glamorous and fun as you thought it was going to be. So remember, it's a two-way street. You're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So trust the process. Invest the time in the interview process. Do your homework on the company. Be prepared. Know as much as you can about the company, their operations, and their competitors. And then just come in ready to explain your qualifications and how you can contribute to the company. So don't force the issue. Don't pester the company with a whole bunch of emails about, I really want to work here, and press them hard to be hired. That's actually going to turn them off from wanting to hire you. So be patient. Don't force it. And in the interview, you really want to get to that stage of try to be relaxed. The more relaxed you can be, the more your natural personality is going to come out. And this definitely increases your chances of getting hired. So they want to know who you are, so don't be afraid to let your personality come out. All right, so that's a little uh, background information to help you relax when it comes to interviews. Let's talk about some of the learning outcomes for this chapter, and then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty tips on things you can do to increase your chances of getting hired after an interview. 4 learning outcomes for this chapter. Item 1 is I'm going to cover some of the different types of interviews that you might come in interaction with. I'm going to talk about the steps of the interview process. Probably the most important learning outcome is that you'll be able to prepare effective answers to common questions asked in a job interview, and also know how to handle inappropriate questions that the interviewers might ask. And then outcome 4, after the interview, your job isn't done. You want to continue to romance the company with follow-up messages, and then do the additional documentation of job acceptance or job refusal and what some of those documents look like. Okay, are we excited? I know I am. Let's dive in. So the 2 most common forms of interviews are the structured interview and the unstructured interview. As a teacher, when I've interviewed for faculty positions at colleges, they always had a structured interview process. There'd be a panel of interviewers, so 6 to 10 people in a room, and each interviewee who went through the process was asked exactly the same questions in exactly the same order. Now, why do you think a company would do that? Well, in the public sector, they're making sure that they have no discrimination issues whatsoever. They're very sensitive to equal employment opportunity. So they have a very structured format to how they ask the questions so that there's no potential for bias in the interview process. So it's very common in the public sector. But other companies also have structured interviews where it has a predetermined agenda. You might have to do a writing sample or a typing sample or something that shows that you can do the type of work that they're requiring as part of the job requirements, and then they'll actually get into the actual interview. The second type of interview is an unstructured interview. So this is a little more freewheeling, where the interviewer does not follow a specific agenda. They're going to have a series of questions that they probably ask everybody, but the interview might ebb and flow a little bit. So it could be either format. So whether it's structured or unstructured, they're going to have some additional, there may be some additional types of interview components added to the mix here. A stress interview, sometimes they'll do this in sales positions where they'll ask you questions like, I don't think you're qualified for this job. Why should we even hire you? And they're looking to kind of knock you off your pins and see how you handle stress. Or they might give you a case study or work scenario where you have to perform under a time limit, and perhaps they don't give you enough time limit, so you're kind of dealing with a little stress. You know, in my faculty positions, we always had to do a teaching demonstration, and they'd only give us a few minutes to do it, but they would want us to cover a lot of material, more material than we could possibly do in the time limit. So we'd have to figure out how to condense the information, and they kind of create some stress intentionally to see how we handle it. So virtual interviews, you know, video conference technology, things like Skype and Zoom, certainly that is becoming more common nowadays, that they'll do a virtual interview. In those scenarios, you want to make sure that your appearance is good and your energy is strong, because you only have kind of your upper half of your body to connect with the interviewer. So series interviews, I've also had those. That's where you might first interview with a peer, somebody you'd be working directly with in a company, and then you might interview with your manager that you report directly to, and then they might even take you up another level to your manager's boss, and they might interview you as well. So you're going through these levels as part of the interview process. Another common tool they use is phone interviews. I would say the phone interview is now moving to that second bullet point of virtual interviews. So that's where they might just interview you over the phone first and then decide if they want to bring you in for a live interview. So when you're submitting your resume and cover letter and You don't know if they're going to do a phone interview first, so make sure your cell phone voicemail has a professional message on it because they might call you to set up a phone interview, and if your voice message is unprofessional in language, they're probably not going to follow up with that piece. So lots of different formats for interviews. Preparing for the interview is probably the most important piece. Preparation improves confidence, and preparation reduces anxiety. There's no better feeling than when you step into an interview and they're asking you questions that you have rehearsed for. Questions about the company, questions about your experience. And the more you can knock these questions out of the park, the more confident you're going to feel during the interview. So I can't stress enough how important this first bullet point is about research the company and the position. A common question that I would ask, and I mentioned this in last week's lecture, is tell me why you want to work for this company. And this is where you should really be able to display how much you know about the company. You've read their annual report, and you want to structure your interview answers as much as possible to lean your answers towards how you're going to contribute to the company. A lot of folks, when they interview, they're a little bit nervous, they're being asked questions, and they're just trying to answer the question. They're kind of playing defense a little bit. And what you want to do is get off defense and really try to talk about not only here's the skills and experience I have, but here's how I would apply my skills and experience towards contributing towards the company, meaning I have some actual ideas. That can really set you apart. You can't answer those questions concisely and with a lot of detail, however, unless you've researched the company, the position, the competitors, their operations, all of that. You want to have a professional appearance. I encourage you to call the company, and you may not talk to the person interviewing you, but you might be able to get to their assistant and ask them, what's the appropriate attire for the interview? You might feel like I should know this and I shouldn't ask this question, but you want to show up looking professional, but not so far over the top professional that you're a significant mismatch for how everybody else is dressed in the company. You'll be walking through the company and you're in your three-piece suit, and everybody else is in jeans and flip-flops, right? You don't want to show up in jeans and flip-flops, but you want to have at least business casual. So ask what the attire is, and then plan accordingly. So you want to plan your time and materials, meaning you should have extra copies of your resume and your cover letter and a list of references. You've notified those references where you're interviewing and what type of position you're going after so they can give you a glowing recommendation. And you've practiced. Practice means you can go on many websites, and in this week's resource page, I've listed some links to websites that provide common interview questions and answers to those common interview questions. You should practice these. When I was interviewing for a faculty position at Mira Costa College, I went online and I was able to find common interview questions for community college faculty interviews. So that's pretty specific, right? That's the beauty of the internet. And they had, I think, about 50 questions. And I ran through them all. And I happened to be on a trip with my sons and we were doing a long drive. And in the car, they would just ask me questions over and over again, and I would answer them while we were driving. And we all had a lot of fun and a lot of laughs. But practice answering those questions so that you can answer succinctly. Preparation makes you appear more confident. You don't want to be a deer in the headlights. You're asked a question, and it's kind of obvious that you're kind of making it up as you go. Try to limit the number of those situations. You might get a few questions that you don't know the answers to, but you don't want to have many questions that you don't know the answers to. Okay, so if we're nervous about an interview, let's take all that nervous energy and apply it towards preparation. Let's get uber prepared for the interview. When you are interviewing for jobs and sending your resume and cover letter, you really want to focus in on a company. So rather than put 40 hours of work into sending your resume and cover letter out to 40 different companies, put 40 hours of work into developing your resume and cover letter and researching one company for a potential interview. So I think a targeted approach is much better than a shotgun approach. So invest in the company, put a lot of time into researching the company, especially if you have an interview coming up. It's so important. With the internet, it's so easy to find all the information you can about a company. You can find out who their competitors are. Go on a stock quote site like morningstar.com and you can type in your company's stock quote, stock ticker symbol, and you'll get their information. And then that stock quote will give you all kinds of information about their competitors and what they're doing. You can get a copy of the company's annual report sent to you. You can go visit their locations if they have brick and mortar locations, get some ideas about what are the operations doing, maybe even talk to some people who work there and get their 2 cents on the company. So that's good intel. Interviews and who gets a job and who doesn't, how much intelligence you get on the company is oftentimes what makes or breaks the interview and sets you apart from the competition. So make this a fact-finding mission to get as much information you can about the company and the person you're interviewing with and the department that you're going to be working in. The more information you can get, the better. So you want to get the company information that is shown on this first column here, and also the position information. Go on glassdoor.com, and try to find out what are people getting paid for this position, what's a probable salary range. Also, how does this position fit into the scope of the company? That's important for you to know how your position interacts with the rest of the company, and also what is the growth track of that position. So research, research, research. I can't stress this enough. And then you actually are coming in for the interview. You can go online and go on YouTube or any other sites and look for interview tips and strategies, or how to conduct a good interview, and simple things. You know, you want to come in and make sure you have the interviewer's name correct. If you don't know if they introduce themselves and it's a little muffled or you didn't catch it, ask them again. I'm sorry, can I get your name again? And pay attention, get their name correct, first and last name. Apply a firm handshake, men and women, this is important. Firm handshake. You don't want to pop their fingernails off, but you definitely don't want to be a limp fish. Make sure your hands are dry. Somebody shaking your hand and getting a wet handshake, that's already bad because they're like, gross, what is with your handshake? So wait to be asked to be seated. Can I get you anything? A glass of water? Are they drinking coffee? Then you should drink coffee too, even if you don't normally drink coffee, but do what they're doing. If they offer something to drink and they have it in front of them, go ahead and take it. It gives you some time to maybe look over your notes, and then you're both drinking, and it kind of, reduces the anxiety, and you have something to drink in case you get nervous and need to wet your whistle during the interview process. You want to maintain eye contact with the person that you're interviewing with, so make sure that you're engaged with that person. You're not looking away, you're not staring off. Please don't be looking at your phone. Make sure you have shut that thing all the way off and have it on silent or just turned off. Unless you have a potential situation, you have kids getting out of school or something, you need to leave it on. You let the person know, but I would encourage you as much as possible, don't have your phone being active during this interview process. Appropriate body language, you want to be leaning forward and not slumping in the chair. So, and then be conscious of your nonverbal message, how you're sitting, how you're holding yourself. Are you crossing your arms, which is defensive? Are you playing with your hair a lot? Ladies, watch for that. So just be focused on the person you're interviewing with and connect with them like they're a friend, and you want to show that you're interested and engaged. So these are things that are positive nonverbal messages. Smiling's important. Making eye contact. Crossing your legs is okay. Animated speaking is okay. You don't want to be excessive with it. You don't want to look like a cheerleader, but let your hands do some talking, and leaning forward a little bit so that they show that you're interested. So they want to let your personality come out in this interview and show that you're an interesting person to work with. Are you interesting? So Let your personality come out. All right, so by now you figured out that I'm outside and there's some work being done in my house. So I'm shooting this video outside. I'm hoping that the wind isn't impacting the audio too much. So the nonverbals that you want to avoid are listed here. So just think of it from this standpoint. When you're engaging with somebody in a conversation, what behaviors do you find distracting? Things like somebody twitching their leg or looking at their phone, basically breaking the attention and engagement with the person that you're talking with. So avoid these behaviors and just stay connected with the person as much as possible. You move on to, as they're asking you questions and why should we hire you, tell me a little bit about your skills and experience. You want to have short boilerplate answers. If you find yourself getting verbal diarrhea, where they asked you a question but you got so much adrenaline going through your body and you're talking really fast, consciously slow down your breathing, slow down so that you're not being a jackrabbit in the interview. You want to have 5 or 6 key points of emphasis that you can fall back on. Things like, I'm a strong communicator, both written and verbal. I'm a solid team player. I'm comfortable managing people and teams. And I'm a self-starter who takes initiative to solve problems and not have to take everything to my boss. So have some key points that you can come back to as they're going through the interview. They're going to ask you about interpersonal skills. When have you had to deal with a conflict at work? My interview at Mira, Costa, they asked me, tell me about some students whose lives you impacted. I wasn't ready for that question, but instead I talked about, here's a student who impacted me, and I had that answer available. They want to see if you have some creativity. You're going to be asked a variety of questions. If you don't have an answer right out of the gate, you can buy yourself some time by saying, wow, that's an excellent question. I haven't been asked that one yet. And let me cogitate on that for a second and then come up with an answer. So you want to display a professional attitude. So what's important here is your language. You don't want to use terms like or dude. So sometimes as you get more comfortable with the person you're interviewing with, you might be like, oh, we have rapport. So he's a surfer. I'm a surfer too. So all of a sudden you drop your professional image and you start trying to connect with this person like they're a dude or a bro or a girlfriend. You don't want to do that. Keep it professional. You also want to avoid talking badly about your previous or former employers. Just say things like it wasn't a fit or they didn't have the opportunities that I was looking for. Maintain a professional attitude all the way through. Even if the person you're interviewing with is being informal, you want to stay professional in the language that you use and how you speak about your current and former employers. You've noticed in the last bullet point on this slide, I have crossed out discuss salary and benefits. The book will say that you should discuss salary and benefits, and my advice is that you don't. Hold off on discussing salary and benefits until they actually give you an offer letter. So you want to do that dance later. Right now, in the interview, you want them to fall in love with you. So you want them to really like your personality and your energy, and you have this amazing skills and experience. That's exactly what they're looking for. When they get to the point where they're asking you, do you have any questions for us? You don't want to ask questions about, so tell me, how much does this job pay? What kind of benefits am I getting? Greedy, 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 right? So that could turn off the employer. Continue to ask questions that are going to focus on how you're the best applicant for the job, and we'll get to that later in this lecture. So be aware of possible discriminatory hiring practices. So I mentioned this in last week's chapter about resumes and cover letters. So you want to be aware of it, and you want to be honest in your application. If you've been arrested, if it's been a long ways back, you can probably leave it out. But employers cannot discriminate against you based on these factors, but they might. And typically, you wouldn't even get into the interview stage. So they may have screened you out based on what they could deduce from your resume. And that's not legal, and they shouldn't do that. I think most businesses nowadays, they hire the person who's best for the job. So I think we're seeing big advances in businesses, and the business environment has become very diverse. When I was at Jack in the Box, we had people of all different races and backgrounds, and it was really who was the best person for the job had the job. That being said, discrimination is still real. So remember what I said in last week's lecture about being careful what you put on your resume unless you believe it's going to play to your advantage. Now, companies like to have diversity in their workplace, and they want to hire diversity in their workplace. So it's actually oftentimes to your advantage to have that as part of what you have to offer the company. So if they ask you questions like, say you're a woman, and they ask you, do you plan to have kids in the next couple of years? You wouldn't want to answer with, that's not really an appropriate interview question. I would just deflect the question as much as possible. I don't know. I'm not really at that stage yet. I haven't thought about it too intently. Or, I'm not even married yet, so that's not really on my radar. Even if you're planning to have kids or perhaps are already pregnant, it's just a question that you kind of deflect those types of questions. If they ask you an out-of-bound question, just try to deflect it. Or if you want to, you can answer the question. So sometimes they do ask questions that are out of bounds. It's the interviewer might just make a mistake. Answer it the best you can, and I wouldn't make a federal case out of it. You can after the fact if you don't get the job, but for now, just try to be as accommodating as possible in the interview. So asking questions of the company, of the interviewer. So again, you can go online and Google very easily good questions to ask of a company during an interview. So again, you don't want to ask questions like, tell me what I'm going to do here. That's been listed in the job description. What happened to the previous person that you hired? That shows that you're a little unsure or lack some trust or confidence. What does this job pay? What are the benefits packages? Makes you sound greedy. But you can ask questions like, how many applicants are you looking to, how many folks are you interviewing for this job? How soon are you planning to make your decision? What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for me in this position? That's a great question to ask, because there they will reveal, here's where we think you're a little weak as a possible candidate. And then you can have a chance to come back and address those issues. So do have some questions prepared to ask the company. Questions that will help show you've done a lot of research on the company. So I noticed that you guys have pulled back on your expansion in the Southeast. Now, is that because those stores weren't successful, or is it because of a different reason? So showing, again, you're asking a question that's really displaying how much you know about the company. So they're looking at your skill set that you're bringing to the company. And companies are looking for a mix of soft and hard skills. Hard skills are, do you know how to do the specific job components of this job? Are you comfortable with using Microsoft Office? Can you type? Do you know how to use Excel? Discipline-specific skills. Maybe they need you to code, or maybe you're taking a marketing position and they need you to know how to do basic Facebook advertising. Those are hard skills. But employers are also very much looking for soft skills. And this is where business communication comes in. Things like being able to work with other people and having social and cultural sensitivity, especially if you're going to manage people. The further up you go in your career, the less your hiring and skills are going to require on hard skills, and it's going to be more about soft skills. Can you manage people? Can you motivate people? Can you deal with having to terminate people And can you build a team and motivate that team? And do you have the emotional intelligence to know how to navigate all the different employees that work for you and how to motivate them and get them to work together in a team environment with different personalities and different skill sets? So those are all soft skill things. So they're going to be asking you questions along those nature. Tell me when you've had to deal with conflict, or depending on the level of position that you're coming in for, they might ask you how you manage people and things of that nature. So be prepared to discuss those. Now, I always say in an interview, if you put something on your resume that is going to help get you an interview, then be prepared to talk about it in the interview. So you may have had something at your previous employer that you didn't directly work on that project, but boy, you really wanted to because you know it'd be a resume builder. If you worked for the company when that project was happening and you had some level of involvement in that project, it could be as light as maybe you made copies of the memo that went out about the start of this project, but you weren't directly involved. I would say put it on your resume, as long as you can talk about it in the interview and talk about how it benefited the company. You've now bought that kind of experience. So fake it till you make it. You don't want to lie as far as your background and experience, but you want to put your best foot forward and stretch yourself to advance to the next level. So these behavioral questions are really what are going to set you apart. You should be able to slam dunk these questions. So there's some examples here. Again, with this conflict, in my Mira Costa interview, they asked me, tell me about a difficult student that you've had to deal with, a difficult colleague that you've had to deal with. Tell me about a committee that didn't go well, or conflict that you had in a committee, and how you had to deal with that situation. So if you may not have work experience directly that pertains to answering each of these questions, you can pull in personal examples to help answer those questions. So describe a time when you faced frustration. How did you deal with it? I was asked these questions and I talked about getting divorced and how me and my ex-wife had to work through that and come to some level of acceptance. So here you're really, in some respects, getting vulnerable and showing that you're a human being and really exposing how you've dealt with those things. So here you're showing I've got some life experience, and my life experience is actually going to help me be a more well-rounded employee. So don't be afraid to pull in some personal examples if you can talk about them in a non-emotional way and really how you use that experience to better you as a human being and how you can apply those lessons towards your work career. You probably want to avoid talking about how you got over a drug addiction or things of those nature. It's part of you, but it's probably not the best example that they want to hear from you. So look for other examples. This could also include things like parenting or taking care of an elder or something you've done through sports or extracurricular stuff. It doesn't always have to be just work related. Sample interviewee questions. So this is you asking the company questions of them. I like the last question best. What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for me in this position? I've always asked these questions in an interview, and I've always got some great responses back. To go back again to the Mira Costa, because I was just hired for this fall semester. I'm a brand new employee at Mira Costa. And in the interview, towards the end, and it was a panel interview, I asked, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for me in this position? And to a person in that interview, they gave me some really pointed things about, here's our concerns about hiring you. And this is a great question to ask because they're going to tell you what their concerns are, and then you can address them. You're now having a very authentic and real conversation that you want to have live while you're in the room versus them having that conversation with you not in the room. We don't think Nate has blankety blank experience. versus them having that discussion with you in the room. And then you can actually address those concerns, which is going to increase your chance of getting hired. So all of these are good questions. That first question, I think you should know this already from the job description. So to walk in and ask, so tell me what I'm going to be doing here. If that was me interviewing you, I'd be like, you should have read the job description. You should already know this. Same for number two. So be careful about those types of questions. All right, so here we are reaching the last step. So you've had a good interview, and now the interview is wrapping up and you're at the closing piece. So the tips here are good advice. You don't want to prolong the interview. You don't want to have an awkward closing. So have some clean way of wrapping up the interview. It's usually going to be instigated by the interviewer. So be polite, smile, make sure you have a good handshake when you leave. And I always closed with a line of mine that was, thank you for your time. If you hire me, you won't be disappointed. So that might sound a little assertive, but have some clean way of wrapping up on a positive note the interview. And then we move into the follow-up stage. So the follow-up piece is just as important as the interview itself. Oftentimes what happens is after everyone's been interviewed, the direct manager of that person that they're looking to interview, as well as that person's boss, who might have also been part of the interview structure, is going to sit down and they're going to compare notes on who they think is the best candidate for the position. So this might happen a couple days later, but the interview process is still going on even after you've completed your interview. So it's a good idea to keep in your car a stack of thank you notes that you can write and pop in the mail directly after the interview. So these would just be simple, clean, just professional quality paper, a blank inside, thank you notes, and you write a quick note to every person that you met in the company, not just the person that you interviewed with, but if you might have bumped into some other people that you're introduced, make sure you get all of those contacts' names from the receptionist before you leave and send everybody a thank you note. Because oftentimes what happens is a couple days have passed and they're still mulling over who they want to interview, or they still have more interviews lined up. And then they get your thank you note in the mail. And it's a handwritten note and it's personalized. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I really enjoyed learning that both our sons want to pursue a professional soccer career, right? So you mentioned something specific that you talked about during the interview. These little finishing touches, it's not sucking up, it's just really having the human touch can make a big difference. A handwritten thank you note versus an email. An email that is received with a thank you note, like we see here, which is an okay way of doing a thank you message. But an email is a chore, right? It's in that email box with everything else. It's like something I have to look at and do. And I think we all appreciate when we get cards in the mail, right? Birthday cards, Christmas cards. We enjoy opening those. They're like little presents. So I'm a big fan of writing a personalized thank you card and popping it into the mail. Right after, as soon as you finish the interview, sit down in your car, write out the thank you notes. Don't walk back into the employer and hand them to them because you're too cheap for postage. Drop them in the mail and they'll get them in a few days. So this example here is a thank you message that's done on email, and they do a good job of having a specific subject line, having some specifics in paragraph 2 about what was talked about in the interview, signaling that they're still interested in the position in the closing and that they want the job. So this is a decent job for an email. Again, I think personalized thank you notes, handwritten, are the best. Here's another example. Same thing. We're following the deductive plan where we get right to the main idea up front, which is thanks for the time for interviewing me. And the lesson here is the interview process continues after the interview via these thank you messages. And a third example here. So all of these work. What's nice about this one is it includes the contact information in the thank you message. So just because you had your resume sent out originally that had your contact information. Don't make them hunt for that. Include it in your thank you message. So I always, in my cover letter, I would say close with thank you. Thank you for considering me for this position. I'll contact you next week to see if we can schedule an interview. Then you have the interview, and then you do this thank you message. Again, signaling that you're still interested in the job and providing your contact information so they can reach out to you. Now we're focusing primarily on the interview process and the follow-up thank you. So there's other types of employment messages listed in this chapter 14, such as resignation letters, job refusal letters, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to cover these. You can read about these in the textbook directly if you want. I will take a few minutes to talk about recommendation requests. Recommendations or references are critical to the interview process. The flow is typically you send your resume and cover letter. You get called in for an interview. You have the interview. And then now that they have the interview, they're getting ready to give you a job offer. Before they give you the job offer, they're probably going to call your references. They usually don't do this until after the interview process because they don't want to waste their time calling references if they don't make it past the interview process. Your references should be alerted to the fact you're interviewing. They should know what the job is that you're going after, and they should know what they need to feature in their recommendation of you as a candidate. So keep track of your references. Keep track of your references. This is critical. And you should never not get hired because your references didn't pan out. At the point they're calling your references, they're ready to hire you. They're just making sure that you're not an axe murderer and you actually did work at the place you said you worked and you did do the things that you said you did on your resume. So your references are going to provide that information and they expect them to be gold. If they can't contact your references, it's a horrible reason to not get the job offer because they really did want to give you the offer if they're at the stage of contacting your references. So keep your references current, let them know about jobs you're interviewing for, and always send your references a thank you message after you've accepted a position. All right, so not too many terms out of this chapter. So we're focusing on the interview process. On this week's resource page, I've provided some links to a variety of things regarding interviews, so you can check those out. The best thing you can do is research the company and be familiar with the common interview questions and have those prepared. And that'll go a long way towards reducing your anxiety, increasing your confidence, making you feel more relaxed, and getting job offers. So there's different types of interviews. They can be structured and unstructured. They can be a stress interview. There's open formalities. There's an exchange of information, and there's a closing. So your third bullet point there, that's the 3 parts of an interview. And then there's other follow-up pieces that happen after the interview. So I hope you found this information fruitful. Again, there's lots of additional resources online if you want to look at actual interview scenarios. Thanks for listening.